and our moderator, and finally like to thank our sponsors whose support has allowed us to provide this workshop free to all. And that's Liberty Hardware, S.J. Edwards Foundation, United Healthcare, Weaver Foundation, Contour Brands, Women's Professional Foundation, First Bank, Cone Health Foundation, the Community Foundation of Greater Greensboro, American National Bank, BB&T, now Truist, and Triad Adult and Pediatric Medicine. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ivan Canada.
Great, thank you, Rhonda. On behalf of the board of NCCJ and our staff and volunteers, I join Rhonda in thanking you all for choosing to spend your time with us today. Last fall, we had over 900 community members participate in the first phase of 846, which provided attendees with a framework and foundational understanding of systemic racism using REI Racial Equity Institute's groundwater approach. We always knew we wanted to continue the conversation and learning, and it is our hope that in this next phase of sessions that we will be able to challenge you all to learn new skills and approaches to drive the kind of inclusive and equitable results that we want to see in our community. So be on the lookout for programming focused on some of the following topics, led by various EDI practitioners and trainers, such as how to center equity in your organization, creating a culture of belonging and inclusion, how white supremacy culture shows up in our organizations, how young people can play a role in the quest for racial justice, and much more. We hope you will join us as we continue to offer this type of programming throughout 2021. You will receive emails from us as new programming is announced. So for our first Beyond 846 series happening today, our plan is simple. It is to hear from local diversity, equity, and inclusion executives and professionals from a variety of industries to explore diverse racial equity journeys, personal growth strategies, vulnerabilities, and ways we may be able to do this work differently based off of the racial awakening of last summer. Before we get started, Karen Jeffries with the YMCA of Greensboro is going to go over a few housekeeping items. Karen?
Hey, Karen, you're muted.
You're on mute, Karen.
Wouldn't you know? Thank you, Brenda. Hi, everybody's telling me, excuse me. Hi, I'm Karen Jeffries, and I am one of the diversity, inclusion, global, and equity leaders here at Greensboro YMCA. I'm so excited to have everyone join us this afternoon. We want this to be an interactive session, so please take advantage of using the chat and Q&A. If you have a question, if you use Q&A, and feel free and comfortable, and let's get started. Brent?
Thank you, Karen. I appreciate it. And first of all, let me thank Ivan and NCCJ for your incredible work in our community. Hats off to you, and it's great to hear that you're going to continue this dialogue this year and into the future. So we in this community look to you to provide that sort of conversation, and I'm glad that you're doing it. And also thank you to the YMCA for continuing with this conversation today. And thank you for your confidence in me to be able to maybe moderate this conversation today. I am in awe of the group that has been assembled here today. Incredible professionals, incredible expertise, and I think you're going to find that out as we get engaged in the dialogue. I am going to read our panelists some portions, I will say, of our panelists' bios today, just so you get to know who we're dealing with. And again, I think you'll be in awe of the incredible talent that we've assembled here today. I'm going to start off with Kiva Elliott, who's the Vice President and Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for Cone Health. I love Kiva's bio because I think it captures her personality so well. So let me read at least the first paragraph and some others, because I love the first paragraph. Kiva Elliott is a wife, mother, sister, and warrior for the underdog. Her faith is at the center of her life, and family time, girls' night out, long naps, and hanging with the locals when traveling brings her joy. She also happens to be the Vice President and Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for Cone Health. She has been a leader with Cone Health for over 9 years and takes pride in serving the people, patients, and communities of the organization. Kiva believes that small actions send a big message, and we all have to be willing to stand up, speak up, and take action for justice. Curiosity, courage, and commitment will lead the way. Kiva has also played key roles with the Bank of America and American Express. She's a member of the United Way's Women United and a board member for NCCJ. Kiva, thank you for joining us today. Our second panelist today is Calandra Walker-Gerald. Calandra is a diversity and inclusion executive within Global Human Resources at Bank of America. In this role, she's responsible for the strategy and execution of programs, processes, and initiatives focused on increasing the representation, investment, and advancement of underrepresented talent across global strategy and enterprise platforms, private bank, and Merrill Lynch Wealth Management. She is also the Market Human Resources Executive for Richmond, Virginia. That's a lot. That's a mouthful. And Calandra, I can't imagine how you do all that. She joined the bank in 1997, and she's a proud alumna of Hampton University. She and her family live in Lawrenceville, Virginia, where she's an active member of the Parent Advisory Council, the local NAACP, and communities in schools. The next lady who I'm going to introduce, I love dearly. She and I first met as part of the Chamber's Other Voices class of class 24, the best class ever, always the best class ever. And we let her get away from Guilford County, and now she's over at the Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools as their Executive Director of Equity, Access, and Acceleration. She ascended to that position in October of 2019. Prior to joining WSFCS, she served in the Guilford County school system for 22 years as a teacher, literacy coach, K-6 language arts curriculum specialist, and supervisor of the Early Literacy Project for African American males in K-3. In more recent years, she served as the supervisor of equity in the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Guilford County Schools. She's also served as an adjunct instructor at her alma mater, North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, and the School of Education for the past 15 years. I can vouch for this. She is a passionate educator, and it's always been her mission to promote and empower students to reach his or her fullest potential and support other educators in creating inclusive and equitable learning environments. She earned her national board certification in 2004 in the area of early childhood generalist, and is proud to have been recognized as the Harris Teeter Teacher of Excellence in 2008. She's a proud graduate, as I mentioned, of NCCA State University with a BS in elementary education. She also earned an MSA from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro and is currently a doctoral candidate in the Educational Leadership Program at High Point University. She's a native of Clinton, North Carolina, and is a product of Sampson County Schools, and she resides in Guilford County with her husband, Scott, daughter, Paige, and her 2 Cocker Spaniels, Cooper and Harley Quinn. Maybe a little bit of when you start talking about Harley Quinn, a little bit of comic book reading in that name as well. So again, a great panel, wonderful folks joining us today. And I'm at 12:11. I know we've got, looking at my page of questions, at least an hour's worth of dialogue to get through. We'll start it off, but also, as you all, our panelists, are watching this, make sure that you're getting your questions in as well. We'll get through all these prepared questions, and then at the end, take those questions from the audience. So be sure to put those up in chat. So let me start off, and I'm going to start off with you, Kiva, with just some kind of basics, organizational basics, if you will. Yeah. Understanding the way your organization does this. So where is the work of equity, diversity, and inclusion positioned within your organization? What's the reporting structure of your department? Who do you report to, and that sort of thing? So give us some insight as to at Cone Health, your organizational structure there.
Yes. So thank you, Brent. So at Cone Health, I report into our chief people and culture officer, and I'm dotted line to Terry Aiken, who is our CEO. So that's the way that we're structured. Now we do have health equity as well. And so health equity reports up through another division, mainly in the physician world. So that's a little bit different, but we're working on maybe bringing those together and having like a center of equity. So that's what we're looking to make sure that we're all aligned on where we're headed.
Do you believe that's in the best interest of the organization to make that sort of move?
Absolutely. I think that by us doing that, we get to make sure that the left hand knows what the right hand's doing, and that we're pooling our resources really to help us. Because when we think about data, we think about all of the different things that we all need, just bring us together, and then we can start to really pull together and make sure that we have shared objectives and our purpose is the same, and that we're all working toward the same thing.
Great. Thank you, Kiva. Mm-hmm. I'll ask the same question of you, Kalandra. Where's your reporting structure within Bank of America right now?
Sure thing. So if I may, there's two verticals here. So there's the reporting structure where diversity and inclusion reports into our head of global human resources, right? So that's Sherry Bronstein. So she runs our global HR business. But most importantly, we have what's called a Global Diversity and Inclusion Council that our CEO, Brian Moynihan, leads for Bank of America, and his management team members are responsible and represent the lines of businesses across our 8 lines of businesses, our regions, and our 93 markets, so that it's not just a human resources thing. So it's not just the metrics and the people. We have the line of business leaders that also are responsible for driving that out. So it reports into the human resources officer, but Brian Moynihan chairs our Global Diversity and Inclusion Council. His management team members have goals that they cascade down. So again, it's so important that the structure complements the accountability of the leaders who really make the decisions and drive the culture.
So I'm hearing from both you and Kiva that you both have the ear of the top executive in the organization.
Yes, has to start from the top.
Absolutely. Gotcha. Effie, same question. Talk to us about your reporting structure there at Winston-Salem, Forsyth County.
Yeah, so thank you. That's actually a really great question. And some of our processes align with the business world. We have a senior cabinet, executive leadership, and that's all of the senior leadership, district leadership that is represented. And I report directly to our Chief Officer of Equity and Accountability. And that is right underneath our Deputy Superintendent, which is a direct line to our superintendent. I do feel very blessed and fortunate within our organization that I also have a direct line to the Deputy Superintendent and to the Superintendent's office. And so within that structure is where a lot of our decision making is made. So as was already stated, it does begin at the top. It's been very intentional too within the last year, even though some of our things got sidetracked because of COVID, is that we developed a strategic plan. And so the work, the actionable steps and goals that we want to achieve for our organization are built directly into that strategic plan. And those who at senior leadership and executive cabinet are responsible for the accountability of those initiatives actually being realized across the district. So it starts at the top, and it's the work that even like our area superintendents and the conversations that they have with principals and the decision making that's happening at the school level, so all of it is intertwined.
So if you've got a strategic plan that you're working on, let me keep you there, Effie. Mm-hmm. And the next question is how did you get started on your EDI journey, the organization? And maybe more importantly, what are some of the initial projects and going back to that strategic plan, what are some of the key performance indicators that are part of that starting phase and maybe even up to now? What are you measuring?
So here in Winston, when I came in October, the process for the strategic planning was just beginning. and it involved all of it involved internal and external stakeholders. But I will say the work of the EDI journey started well before that, from advocacy from the community, from district leaders. As part of our core values, equity is one of our core values. And so the journey started before I came, but since I came, I can speak only to the time that I've actually been in the district, which was October 2019, was the work of the strategic plan. So getting key input from key stakeholders. So there was listening sessions that were held. There were sessions held where we did a SWOT analysis where those who were in the room were able to identify and voice the strengths that they saw, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats for the district. And using that information, we were able to land on 5 big goals for the district. And within each of those 5 goals, equity is embedded throughout. So that's, I would say, a lot of what we did to get started. I'll talk about a couple other key points too. Right before I came, for about a year before I came, there was a culture, climate, and equity committee that was a subcommittee to the Board of Education. And they met monthly and they voiced and talked about and discussed inequities that were apparent in the district. That was how this Office of Equity for the district came to be about, because of the work from that group that was working. And also as a part of that was a big push for us to have an equity policy. So one of the very first things that I did when I started was work with some other key people in the district to write a policy. We got lots of feedback from that Culture, Climate, and Equity Committee. Of course, brought it to the community for public input, and then was able to get it approved in January. So that also helps to guide the work that we have been embarking on over the last year.
And Effie, how about some performance indicators? You don't have to give us everything, but what kind of data are you following? What kind of performance indicators are you looking at?
So of course, we live in a data-rich environment.
Yes, you do.
And so we're looking at, so I'm gonna tell you the big 5 things, and I've put some notes here, so because I know I can start talking and I want to stay on track. But here are some of the things we talked about. Achievement is one of those big things. So we looked at what our performance data was and what our gap data looks like. So that's a part of the metric. We're also looking at HR. And so we want to make sure that our demographics of our staff reflects the demographics of our district. So we have an intentional goal to raise Hispanic and Asian principals in our district. We only have one, I think, that's identified as Hispanic right now. We also want to do that for our teachers. We're looking at discipline disproportionality, EC identification, and even our community, parent, and family engagement. Now, that was the one thing we had a tough time kind of putting a metric on. So right now we're building a baseline for that so that we can set a goal. But multiple areas of data that we've looked at and set metrics for those areas.
Excellent, excellent. Calandra, let's go next to you. Talk to us about the start of this journey for Bank of America, and again, some of the metrics that you're looking at with regard to EDI policy.
Sure thing. So our formal name is diversity and inclusion. We have not stamped out equity. So if you don't hear me say that a lot, it's not that we don't practice equity or that it's not fundamental. It's just not in our title. So we date back probably about 20 plus years where we started really evolving our responsible growth strategy. So financial services is probably a little bit different, right? So imagine financial services, we don't have tangible things or people that is a part of our directive, right? You're talking about products and services. So how do you incorporate that? And it really started moving into our great place to work strategy. So how do you get 212,000 people, if you will, underneath an umbrella where there's a great place to work and we deliver for people, inclusion, and clients and communities? So it started as a moral imperative. It's the right thing to do. And then, of course, we have EEOC guidelines that we have to meet. And then it turned into a business imperative. So it's not just the right thing to do, it's good business. So we started to see that clients that became more socially conscious, more environmentally conscious, wanted to know more about, what we stood for. So it became core to our business. So what we've done now, we have people, inclusion, clients, and communities. And underneath that, it's a great place to work. People have to want to work for us. So we have internal talent measurements from a people perspective, where we measure the advancement of women at all levels of the organization, our underrepresented ethnic groups. So Black and Hispanic Latino are two big opportunities for us. So we measure the advancement of women and Black, Hispanic, Latino talent specifically, but also Asians, Native Americans, and all people of color. And we measure that. What I'm most proud of is that it also not only hits our senior leader level, but we measure it from an improvement with our managers. So we need more managers that reflect the communities we serve. We need more advancement at levels of the organization. So moving from one level from the CEO to the other, we measure that from a women and people of color standpoint. And then our senior leadership. So those of you who have ever been in a Bank of America financial center, quick example, you'll probably see a lot of diversity because it reflects that community or where that center sits. So we're strong at our frontline customer serving level. Where the gap comes in is our senior leadership level. So we want to make sure that just like our frontline or our mid-level employees, we have lots of diversity, that our senior leadership level reflects that same diversity. So lots of work there. And then underneath that is our inclusion strategy. So you can have all the diverse talent in the world. You can move through all the women and people of color that you can. But if you don't have a culture that's inclusive, that creates that value and that sense of belonging, where people feel treatment is fair and they're respected, you get zero value from all that diversity. So we've evolved from a very much moral imperative to business imperative to it's just everyone's accountability. And we do that through people inclusion and then clients and communities. A lot of you may know, based on the social unrest of the summer, which I know we'll talk more about lately, Bank of America has committed $1 billion to social equity and racial injustice. And that's where the really clients and communities piece comes in. So lots of great work happening, but started as a moral imperative and now it's just good business.
And so your measures internally come from the number of folks within management ranks, the number of people ascending and taking on greater responsibility and higher positions and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. What about communities? How do you measure your impact of diversity and inclusion in the communities themselves? What are your KPIs for that?
Absolutely. So we have our market president's office where we have 93 markets and each one has a market president. So each of them have deliver for our communities, deliver for our employees, deliver for our clients. Each of them have metrics within each market president, because that's something that has to be very local, right? You can't measure how we're doing in our communities at the top of the house because we have a 40-state footprint and we're global. So we have a market president for each of our major markets. So we have our major markets, our metro markets, and our suburban markets. And each market president underneath that has a clients and communities index that they look at from a volunteer standpoint, their giving, their footprint in those communities. And then we roll that up to the enterprise.
Great. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Now, Kiva, how about you? How did you all get started on the EDI journey, and how are you measuring your progress and your success?
Yes, so we have been on this journey for a while. I've been in this role for about 2 years, but I've been with Cone for 9. And so one of the things that I really want to bring up, and I think Kalandra talked about it too, is the culture, right? And so we started probably 10 years ago around, hey, what do we want our culture to be, right? And what do we want? Who are we and who do we want to be? And so that culture work started like a decade ago. And so they wanted to change the way that our culture was. And so from there, we went from transforming our culture then to thinking, okay, let's talk about how does diversity, equity, and inclusion fit into this? And then from there, determine that, hey, we really need to put more focus around this work. And so that's when I came on board as the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer. And so one of the things that, just to tell you about our KPIs, one of the things that we have measured for the last 3 years, this will be 4 years this year, is we wanted to increase the representation at the director and above level. And I think Kalandra talked about that as well, is, you know, we know what it looks like at the front line, and we know that that's typically where we have a lot of representation and balance pretty much in our organization. And we knew that from the director and above, there was a gap. And so we always say we're going to start where our problems are. And that's where our problems are. And so we have committed for the last couple of years to having 50% of the directors and above that we hire, that they will be racially diverse. And so that's our goal. That's on our system-wide strategic goal. So it impacts how the system performs, and it also impacts incentive as well, because we knew that it's that important, and we want that to be tied to the incentive of our teams. So that's one that we have been watching for several years now, and we're still committed to it. But one of the things too that I want to bring up as well is the leading metrics, right? Because if we start at the director and above level, we got to think about people below that level. And how are we promoting those people? How are we developing those diverse or marginalized communities to be able to step into these roles at the director and above level? So we're definitely watching that as well, and looking at that and thinking about what we need to do differently. We also, as it relates to accountability, we also have policies in place, and we're watching and measuring those, that we know that if you don't have a diverse slate of candidates, then you're not going to hire diverse candidates. So we have policies in place around having a diverse slate of candidates. And we also know that if the interview panel is not diverse, the chances of a diverse candidate getting chosen is very slim. So we have those policies in place as well, and we track that so that we know exactly who we're interviewing, who's on the panel, and how and what that slate of candidates looks like. So those are a couple of the things that we're measuring and paying attention to right now.
And Kiva, how about health outcomes and disparities in health outcomes? Are you measuring those as well, and are there goals for that as well?
Yes, absolutely. So we're, like I said, health equity sits outside of diversity, equity, and inclusion currently, but we have an entire division. So we have a community and wellness division that focuses on measuring and looking at the social determinants of health. So they're looking at things like food insecurity, they're looking at transportation, they're looking at all of these things that really, when you think about it, healthcare is only one piece of the puzzle, right? There's the environment that really prevents and goes against the great health outcomes that we want to see. So we're looking at those things. We're also looking at disparities, right? So we're looking at data and figuring out, hey, where do we have an access problem, and how are we managing that? So they have several different goals that they're focused on as well. And one is, hey, do we have the care in the places that we need the care? And so that's an initiative that they're working on to see, hey, how do we do that? How do we bring the care to the community? Also around learning, doing a big piece around that, because we know, and even though I will say all the time, a training class is not going to do it, right? It's going to take more than a training class to get us where we need to be. But we do know that there are foundational pieces that we have to continue on and on and on to educate people around that. And one of the things that we have put in place is that every leader it is required that every leader attends the bias class. And then we follow up with that on our every conversation matters. So we're doing a lot around learning. We're doing a lot around trying to get the data and look at our disparities and determine how we can help to help with those inequities within our communities.
That's great. Thank you, Kiva. Thank you very much.
Mhm.
All right, let's move on to another question here. And Calandra, I'm going to start with you on this one. Share something that you're proud of as it relates to this work. What are some of the things that made that success possible in your mind?
Yeah, so I think to piggyback on Kiva, we've created something I'm most proud of called Courageous Conversations and moving to courageous actions. So everything starts with a conversation. And I think from a culture perspective, we realize that, you know, you've got, again, you've heard me say 200,000+ people having to move in the same direction. And while we have a core value system that we look to, people are, you can't control how you grew up and what your experiences inform you. And you think about the number of religions and, you know, views, and whether it's political or whether it's personal. So we created something called Courageous Conversations, where we have an actual framework that fits underneath our value system that really not only allows you, it encourages you to tackle some very tough topics. So we've tackled topics that 20 years ago, I've been with the company 25 years and been out of school 30. When I started working, you would never talk about race, sex, religion, politics, gender. It was just taboo. And we've created a conversation guide where you have to tackle those topics in this day and age, because you've got social media and messages hitting us 24/7, 365, the devices that we carry around. So you're getting pop-ups all the time. And whether you believe it or not, want to acknowledge it or not, people are talking about this stuff in the workplace. They're just not talking about it out loud. So how do we just lay all our cards on the table? And these courageous conversations really enable us to tackle tough topics around whether it's Me Too, Time's Up, whether it is racial disparity, whether it's, you know, women's advancement, it could be religious differences. So we've had, you know, around empathy, understanding, walking a mile in someone else's shoes, which is really at fundamental, because we can't change people's minds. And again, you can't change how someone grew up, but having these conversations that talk about common ground and listening and empathy and meeting people where they are have been so fundamental, specifically to a company our size, where we've got 20,000+ managers that are leading the rest of our people. So, you know, how do you manage diverse talent? How do you create that culture where everybody can thrive and feel valued? Those conversations have been great. And then we did something called Courageous Conversations 2.0, which is Courageous Actions, where we stepped out exactly how you need to play this out, no matter where you sit in the organization. So whether you're at the most senior leader level of the organization, or whether you're in a financial center doing lobby leading, you need to check your biases as number one. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable is our next action. Be proactive about inclusion is number 3. Listening with empathy and understanding, which is saving space for grace and assuming good intentions. And then lastly, leading from wherever you are. So moving from the conversation to getting to those courageous actions, we've seen a huge change in our culture. Our D&I index has went up tremendously. And we just see this. I think probably about 50,000 of our teammates have actively participated. So that's what we're most proud of, is creating that culture where you can start the conversation and have authentic two-way dialogue.
Calandra, are there incentives for participating in that program, or is that a requirement to participate in those Courageous Conversations program?
Not a requirement. We want this to be very voluntary, which speaks volumes, right? Because when you've got thousands of people that are raising their hands to attend and taking time out of their very busy schedule, specifically managers,
Right.
that are volunteering to do this, I think it's exponentially impactful, because they're showing they have the desire to want to learn on their own. No incentives either, right? It's just the cost of leadership of being at the company. We encourage participation, and the reward is when you participate without the mandatory.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely.
Effie, it sounds a little bit like other voices, doesn't it? I'm gonna turn to you and let you talk about something that you're proud of as it relates to this work. And again, what were some of the things that made that success possible?
It does sound like a lot like other voices. And so I was glad to hear Kalandra say she's been with the organization for 25 years and they just started having the conversation. So as you heard in my bio, I was with Guilford County Schools for 22 years. And in my last probably 8 years there is when I really saw those conversations take off. And so changing organizations, I first had to come in, and it kind of goes to one of the questions that was in the chat. You have to come in and kind of get a lay of the land and see where the organization is, what has happened, and where do we need to go. So I'm proud to say that there's a lot of good things that are happening, and some of those conversations are happening. They're not as widespread as we want them to be just yet. So we have some courageous principal leaders that are engaging in conversations around race and racial equity and all of that with their staff. We are putting together a plan for professional development that will roll out for senior leadership and also what we call joint principal management team. So you may hear me say JPMT for short. Which will be all of our principals, directors, executive directors, chiefs, everybody, where we will be engaging in these very conversations that are so needed within our organization, and particularly at this time. And there are other places where I'm doing trainings with schools specifically that have asked that they want to begin these conversations and may need support facilitating the conversation. So the work of starting the conversations, guiding the conversations, and continuing the conversations is definitely in progress. I will also say that we have a few other things that I'm really proud of too. We are doing some really great work with the Bridges Collaborative. They're with the Century Foundation. And that organization really is about pushing policy to create more integrated communities. More integrated schools, more integrated housing communities, neighborhoods, and to make sure that they are inclusive. And so this collaborative just started in the last 6 months. It's 57 organizations across the country. And the timing was perfect for us to apply and actually be accepted to be a part of this work, because we have a new school that will be opening next year. We have some new schools on the list to be built. And so we have some work to do in our district along the lines of reassigning students, improving our choice and magnet programs, because in our district, we definitely have clear racially identifiable schools. And that wasn't always the case. At one point in time, we had achieved unitary status based on what federal guidelines say. And we are not necessarily there. So we have some clearly racially identifiable schools. And so this partnership is going to help us to guide that work here in the district. We also have a really great, strong partnership with the University of Virginia, their School of Education. They're working with several of our schools that are schools that are in some of our most underserved communities and serve students who are majority, African-American students, Hispanic students that live in those underserved communities. And so that's some really powerful work to transform their learning environments and working with the leaders and teachers in those schools, and even working with us as district level representatives to support the school to really transform what is happening in those schools. So those are some things that I'm really, really proud of. I will say this one last thing, because I think equity flows on all levels, and I think truly about the instruction of students and getting them access to higher level courses. So that's a part of our KPI, more AIG, AP, those higher level courses. But I will say it's also courageous that's within our strategic plan and our operations department, and with the support of the board, is to address MWBE, so minority women businesses, own businesses. And as we were looking through our data, we are reaching a threshold of about 10% of all of our contracted services for construction bills, I'll just say for construction, that were MWBE. But as we did a little bit more digging, what we found was that many of those companies were not owned by African Americans. And so we have been in works and conversations with between the operations, the guy over operations, to literally work on transforming that and how we support businesses to be able to understand how to bid, receive bids. If their company is not large enough right now, trying to do some planning. We're working on some plans now on being able to partner them with corporations that are larger so they get the mentorship and can help to grow their businesses. So there's a lot of work that's happening in many different areas. And those are some things that I really feel very proud of to say that we are doing in our district at this time.
Effie, that sounds like a program that, I don't know, something like a Chamber of Commerce could help with. So I hope you're looking to the chamber over there to maybe get a little bit of assistance.
There's a lot of work happening with the chamber. Absolutely.
Good. Excellent. Because I know we're doing it here in Guilford County as well. So awesome. All right, Kiva, we've given you some time. What's something you're proud of that you've accomplished with as it relates to this work, and what were the things that made that possible?
Yes. So I'll just go ahead and say that we are, as a part of our strategic plan, so we have 4 different pillars. So we have strategic integration, which really is about embedding and changing some of the institutional barriers that we know are there. We also have strategic leadership, economic or social responsibility, as well as people strategy. So I'll just go ahead and say, Brent, that we are actually in the data gathering stage for our supplier diversity program. So we're actually partnering with a vendor to help us understand. We're just at those stages of understanding what we purchase, how we purchase it, and who we purchase it from. So we're in this stage of doing that. So we've kicked that off. So I'm very, very proud of that, and definitely working with the chamber on that. Another thing that I want to say that I'm very proud of is that we will be kicking off our mentoring program for men of color. And so we're starting that program in March, and we have pulled several stakeholders together, and we are developing that program. And one of the reasons why we did that, and I think I said this before, is we look at where our problems are and we build from there. And so we know that we don't have the promotion rate or the leadership rate for our men of color at Cone Health that we would like to. So that's one program that we're going to be kicking off starting in March. Very, very proud of that. Also proud that we have created a culture and inclusion executive steering committee. And that executive steering committee is people that are executives in the organization as well as board members. So we have board members and executives working together to help us execute our strategic plan. So we got board members on the committee for helping to create the mentoring program for men of color. We have members of that group that are responsible for helping us to look at and pull back the layers on some of our policies and our practices and really making the changes that need to be made. Also, I'm very proud of our Every Conversation Matters program. So we're kicking that off starting this month. We start this week, actually. And that's going to allow our leaders and allow our employees to understand the value of a conversation. And let's just be real. We know that there are people that don't want to talk about performance in an organization, right? So they're not going to talk about race and microaggressions and white privilege, and they're just not going to do it. So we're trying to make that place safe and provide them with some tools and a model to use for just having conversations, and how crucial they are to leading to advancing the work of not only DEI, but the work of our culture itself. So those are a couple of things, Brent, that we're really, really excited about. I also have to say too that, we serve all patients. And so, this work it's not just for our employees. If our employees feel that sense of belonging and feel like they're not fitting in, they're part of who we are, and they own that work and own the education of the for educating themselves and making sure that they are that our organization is truly inclusive and equitable, then that translates and transfers into the care that they provide for our patients. So we're just really proud that we are on this journey, and it is definitely a journey, and we are just excited about where we're going and where we're headed.
Thank you, Kiva. And you mentioned a challenge there, in that, you know, these conversations may not be for everyone, right? Trying to get people to engage in these conversations. And so I'll turn the page as to, you know, what are some of the most challenging aspects of doing this work within your organization, and how do you overcome those challenges? And so, Kiva, I'll just start with you and let you keep going. What are those challenges?
Yeah, so I think the challenges really are that a lot of this work, when you really think about it, is the heart work, right? It's the heart and the soul work. And I can't change, as Kalandra said, I can't change how you grew up. I can't change all of those beliefs that have been ingrained in you for decades. But what I can do is challenge you to think about how this work can be an asset, but it's also a disruptor, right? And so we got to make sure that we are providing people with the tools and providing them with what they need to be able to help us to advance this work in the way of systemic just changes, institutional changes, policy changes, program changes. So I think the challenge is that everybody's at a different place on the journey. And we just got to meet people where they are and help them from there. And that's really challenging, because I remember coming into this space and I said, and I had to quickly bring that back, reel that back in. I said, I'm not talking about building a case for DEI, okay? If you want a business case, you go Google it, and that's fine. It's been out there forever and people can find it. And then I said, and then learning, right? Well, we've been teaching this stuff forever. Like, why do we still have to continue to teach people? And so I started saying, no, we're going to start with action, and we're going to move. We're not going to go back to the foundational pieces. And that quickly became a mistake of mine. It's like, listen, we got to start and meet people where they are. Yes, this work has been around forever, but everybody hasn't been engaged in it. And now, you know, people are more engaged. We're seeing power shifts that we have not seen in forever. So I think the challenge is you just got to meet people where they are, and know that everybody's at a different place, and we got to help bring them along.
Yeah, I think there are studies out there, Kiva, that show that as adults, we've got to see something or ingest a message 9 times before it finally takes hold. For some of us who went to Duke, it's probably more like 15 times. But also, I mean, you've got to be open, first of all, to receiving that message to begin with, right? So, you know, you may never even have gotten those 9 times if you're not open to it. And part of it is getting folks to open their hearts and their minds to that message as well. Kalandra, I'll go to you next. What are your challenges, and how are you overcoming them in this work?
Well, we don't have enough time to talk about all of the challenges. But I think to Kiva's point, it's inclusion is at the heart of our story, right? If you can get the inclusive culture straight, the diversity will work itself out. But I think underneath that, it's understanding. We do something like, where are you on your D&I journey? So, you know, you could be we have teammates and leaders that are fully committed, as an example, on racial issues or women's issues, but may be very unaware or uncomfortable talking about LGBTQ issues, right? So it's not just this monolithic narrow view. You could be all in on one topic and completely unaware or uncomfortable on another. And I share this, just being transparent. I grew up in Southern Virginia on a farm, first generation college grad, very religious family. And we did not talk about LGBTQ at my daddy's dinner table. That's just not something you did in 1975, 1980. Fast forward to me being a D&I executive, I had to literally coach someone up. They thought when they mistook my silence for some type of compliance or not being supportive. And I said, you know what? I don't want to say anything offensive or out of line. I don't know enough about it. I want to learn. So I think using that quick example, we have to meet people where they are, as Kiva said beautifully. Where are you on your D&I journey? Based on different topics and different instances, and the world keeps changing. And then underneath that, how do you, once you agree to that this is going to be our platform, how do you weave D&I into everything you do? It cannot be episodic or just be an HR thing or a measurement thing. It has to show up in recruiting, talent development, onboarding, hiring. It has to show up in how we interface with our clients, our social responsibility platform, our business model, our products, our services, our benefits. So the biggest challenge is, number one, where are you on your journey as a leader of an organization or a function or a process? And then number two, how do we integrate it into everything we do so it becomes very natural and proximate and not just this event, check the box, one hit wonder. And it's an evolution. We'll get there, but it just takes constant work, and it takes making it top of mind in everything we do.
Love that answer, Calandra. Effie, you want to add to that in terms of challenges?
I mean, I think Kiva and Calandra have both hit the nail on the head. What I remind myself all the time, even though equity work is very much so heavy lifting, we all enter at different places on different topics and spectrums of things. And in education, what's even interesting too, and I'm sure it's within other organizations, is the guidelines from the federal and the state level that creates barriers that we have to try to navigate too. But what I often remind myself of, and as I am engaging in conversations with others, it's about the heart and it's about the mind. This is really about hard work, and it's also about educating others. And so creating those spaces, while they may be challenging for some, it is really about helping to develop that understanding. But we've got to, I mean, it's really about hard work. You've got to really want to do it. You've got to be in a space where you can do it. And you have to be courageous enough to lead, sometimes even when you may be standing out there all alone. And so it's fortunate, and I feel the sentiments from Calandra and Kiva, that we work in organizations where we're not on an island all alone. And so having that is half the battle when you have people that are working towards the same cause to achieve these equitable outcomes that we've been talking about for so long. I think somebody said earlier, it seems like we've been talking about this forever. And it does. And sometimes you get tired of the talking. And definitely, like Calandra said, what is the action? So we have conversations coupled with actions. And while we've come so far, we still have a long ways to go. So I'll say this as I close out kind of my thoughts on this, is that when we're having these conversations, we're working on putting initiatives and programs and practices in place that can really change a culture. Sometimes we want that change to happen overnight or to be very swift. And I'm reminded of listening to Dr. Zaretta Hammond a few weeks ago, who wrote the book, Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain. And she says, sometimes we have to go slow to go fast. And I have to remind myself that this is a marathon. This is something we've been dealing with for hundreds of years, and it's not going to change overnight. So just staying steadfast, staying courageous, and keep pushing every day. and getting those small wins leads up to big wins. And so I echo their challenges, and that's just how I feel like I deal with it and keep pushing forward in this work.
It's a great answer, Effie. Thank you. Thank you. So let's move into racial injustice. And so I've got a question here. What racial injustice moment or occurrences has had the most impact on you in the past year, and how did you incorporate that into the work within your organization? Calandra, I'll start with you on that question, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. So I think the juxtaposition, the cumulative tragic murders of probably Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Rayshard Brooks, like leading up into around midsummer, all of that kind of came together. And our CEO boldly stepped out and said, you know, we will not tolerate racism. And then he came back and said, there's an urgency that we can't let it die down. We can't let it quiet down. And then he backed those words up with, again, the $1 billion commitment, you know, talking about, you know, focusing on jobs, you know, affordable housing, small businesses, and health. So I think that moment really impacted the company, specifically with me where I sit, because sometimes when you're in D&I, you almost become desensitized to stuff. And I know that sounds horrible, but this is where we live. Other people visit here. This is where we live. Right. So I was almost like, but then when that happened, I'm like, oh my God, we're having different experiences as opposed to other people. So one of the things I think we quickly did that I'm most proud of is we built this whole toolkit around how to have a conversation specifically about race. And we broke that down around understanding the issues, maintaining perspective, listening with empathy, you know, asking for help, seeking to understand. So we brought the historical context to all of this. But I think the moment that really cut the light switch on for everyone, and this is just real talk, this is Calandra's answer, not the bank's answer, is when you watch TV and you saw people from all different walks of life peacefully protesting and standing up for something. It was a horrible thing to happen, but my goodness, it was a beautiful sight to see, you know, people of Jewish descent, Muslims, Black, white, Hispanic, Latino, Asian. You saw people from everywhere protesting the injustices. So that really sparked the company to kind of rally together, and it's really helped catapult our inclusion efforts. I'll stop in a minute, but the other thing I'd say is what it also made us realize is that we need to make sure as we're focusing on inclusion and focusing on women and people of color, that we don't inadvertently leave out the white male. Because not only do we need the majority as advocates and sponsors, white men have a cultural identity. Brent, you have a cultural identity, and it's so easy to leave that out when you see the injustices happening to other groups. So lots of learnings, lots of work to be done around getting everyone's voice, which is where the inclusion part really takes off. But the moment that sparked it was the events of the summer that kind of all came together.
Kiva, how about you? Did you have a similar moment?
Absolutely. And I think that for me, when I saw that, as Calandra talked about, I thought, well, two things happened to me. Because at first I'm like, well, this has been happening all along. Why are we just now getting, you know, taking action on it? And then when I saw all of the people rallying together, I think that other people have said this too, but it really, really felt in my heart like it was a movement and not a moment. And I think that that's what shifted our entire organization. And one of the things that also shifted is, you know, we started that like not long after the George Floyd event, we did inclusion circles. We had never done them before. And in our strategic plan, inclusion circles were really designed as a learning opportunity. So we would talk about things like microaggressions. What is it and how does it happen and how do we stop it, right? And then white privilege. What does that look like? And why does that offend people when we say privilege or whatever? But then we said we had to pivot really quickly. And we said, no, people are coming to work. They are hurting. They are feeling the pain of this, and we cannot not allow them to have a place to process and a place to just come and be with one another. Of course, it had to be virtual because of COVID, but we did inclusion circles. And that's where we opened it up to the entire organization and said, come. And we partnered with our counselors, our EAP counselors, and said, hey, we want to just have dialogue. We want people to just come talk about their feelings and just kind of help them think through and think about how we move on from here. And so I think that to me was a pivotal moment in Cone Health's history around, we started talking about it and where we would not talk about it in this way before.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say, Brent.
Thank you. Thank you. Effie, how about you?
So like Kiva and Kalandra said, those same events had the most impact on me over the last year. And it did spark a lot of conversations in our district in somewhat, I would say, a different way. For some teams and schools across our district, they were doing book studies, many of the things that you saw other places do. And I was one of the ones that was like, we need to have a panel, we need to do this, we need to do that. And a few colleagues, we had a conversation and said, are we doing this for the moment? Or is this something that's going to be long-standing?
Mm-hmm.
So we began to think about, what are we really going to do that's really going to make change? So yes, there's some professional development that is happening, and that's going to continue as we're planning on rolling it out in February. So starting to implement that and really get those in-depth conversations going. And they were already happening in some places and have intensified or started in other places maybe that they have not before. But the other thing in the education realm, when we really sat back and looked at our data and who is being suspended disproportionately, who's being identified for EC disproportionately, who's not getting in those advanced courses, our call to action was to really change policies and practices. So like currently we are working on looking at policies, because policies lead to practices. And so looking at those policies that may be outdated or race neutral, that are very subjective and can lead to the disproportionate suspensions and all of that, is really starting to take a deep look at those and work on revising those policies. That's really going to impact us long term. Changing our code of conduct. That's some work that's starting to happen. And I didn't mention it earlier, I did type it in the chat, but one of the things we got pushed, approved through the board was to start our equity advisory. We have about 21 diverse members from our community. We meet actually for the first time on Thursday. And they're going to be instrumental in the work that we do to really change the narrative in our district and to change outcomes for students. Because as we look at policies and begin to revise those, as we work on our code of conduct, as we work on our pathways to AIG and higher level courses, we need their input. We need their feedback on those practices, on those programs, on those initiatives, and all of those things. And so that work starts Thursday. So, we're in a little bit of a different place in organizations. But I think just the events from this summer and even things that had happened prior to that has been a catalyst to all of what's happening, and even us coming together today to have this conversation. And so, we have leaders in our district that are really committed to doing these things. And these are things that can really change the outcome of our students and have a positive impact on our community as a whole, because our children are our future. And if they don't get quality education, if they're not reading by the time they graduate high school, they're not critical thinkers, they're not leaving with skills and career minded and tools and things to help them be successful, we're still in the same place. And so, I think all the things that we are doing to change outcomes, is some of it is from the events that happened this summer and just the what we have seen as the inequities that have persisted for so long. And we're committed to trying to change that.
Yeah, and I would commend the organizers today, because you've got 3 institutions or 3 industries that are critical to the health of someone, regardless of race or color or ethnicity: education, financial, and health. And we have to make sure that we're focusing on all of these industries. They're critical to anybody's future. Kudos to organizing it around these 3 industries. We've got about 5 minutes left before we start taking questions from the audience today. I'll ask a simple but complex question, and maybe we can get through this one. But how might the fear of white people being labeled racist hurt the quest for racial equity? Calandra, you want to take that one first?
I would love to dive in. I think it goes back to my inclusion comment, right, around white male inclusion, or just white people being labeled racist. I think from an inclusion perspective, labels are, while they may be very real, they're also very detrimental to inclusion. It's so natural for the human brain to just kind of compartmentalize and put a label on someone. So I think white, and I want to make sure I'm clear, white people being afraid of being labeled racist. I think there's the opportunity, again, to bring everyone into the conversation, no matter how they feel or how you feel or where our stance is. And you think about our history. I think I heard Effie, mention, this 400 years, right? 401 to the day of enslavement of Black African Americans. We're not going to solve this overnight, but we're also not going to solve it by not having conversations with the people that we feel like that are the oppressors. So we've got to find a way. We've got to stay vigilant around bringing people together, and tackling the tough topics, and then calling a thing a thing. I think it's so important that we have conversations with everyone. And I think fast forward, we saw what happens when people don't feel heard. Last week, right, at the Capitol, we see what happens when people feel like their voice isn't heard, or that they're losing power, or that the game is changing. So we've got to make sure that we're being inclusive along the way. I hope that answered the question.
I think it's a great question. Kiva, Effie, do y'all want to chime in? Kiva, you want to?
Yeah, the only thing that I will say and add to that is that we cannot lose the power of relationships, because once you start to build relationships with your colleagues or with your community or whatever, there's a trust that happens too, right? And so trust is at the foundation of everything. So I will feel so much more, I will feel better about having a conversation if I'm building that relationship and trust in that person, so that I can say to them, when you said that really offended me, or that really made that was a microaggression. Do you know what a microaggression is? So I think it's about making sure that the relationship is there, and making sure that you're making it, that your organization and your environment is conducive for that. Because without that, you're not going to have the conversations, and you're not going to be taking the action. So it's all about, we have to come together, and we have to talk, and we have to really, really just open up those lines of communication, because that's really what's going to help us to move from intent to impact.
Yeah, the age-old say. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Calandra. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but looking for things that we have in common versus what tear us apart, right? As you're building those relationships, it's hard to hate up close. So finding what we have in common. I love that point, Kiva. Yeah,
I was gonna say there's an age-old saying that progress moves at the speed of trust, and I think that's a big part of this. Effie, how about you?
I would just add to what they said by establishing those norms and kind of ground rules at the beginning, and everybody who's going to be at the table for that conversation having the buy-in, having them to actually talk about what might be some stumbling blocks and some ouch moments for you during these conversations, and how do we overcome that as a group. I hope that really establishes trust and starts to build relationships within the community that's engaging in the conversation. Without that, it can what we don't want to see happen is that a greater wall is put up that's not penetrable at all, and turn people, it turns it off, that they're not willing to even be at the table to engage in the conversation. And so having just those ground rules that where everybody has participated, helped to develop and have buy-in for them, can help get you on a good footing to be able to really have some deep conversations.
Really good point. Really good point.
Can I add one more?
Sure.
Because a lot of times organizations want to start on a DEI journey without really understanding where their people are, right? And so they don't ask and they don't find out what are the issues or what are they. So it's almost like if you don't have a trust in your organization around other things, to think that you're going to have trust around DEI issues, really, you're just fooling yourself. So you really got to focus on that culture and making sure that you're being true to yourself and knowing that, no, this is the real thing that's happening. And how do we address it from there? Because it's very difficult to start on a path of inequities and racial justice when there are other things that are in your organization that you haven't addressed.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's really important as well.
That's right. Where are you on your journey? That's right.
Yep.
So I'm going to dive in. Thank you all very much. I've got 1:13 on my computer screen and I've got until 1:25. So I'm going to dive into some of these questions. I am not going to get to them all, and I'm not going to ask for all three of you to answer each one. I'm going to ask, who wants to take it. Calandra, I can tell you there are a lot of questions and requests in here for some of your materials. So I know we'll follow up with you afterwards to see what you're comfortable sharing and what you're not, and that's all great. I'm going to start off with this one because I'm a white person wondering about the appropriateness of white people being in positions of power re-EDI. On one hand, people of color have been leading this work and expected to do so on their own for too long. On the other hand, I understand the importance of having people of color in leadership as well as other positions. What are your thoughts? Who wants to take that one?
So your thoughts around having having white people lead the DEI work?
Correct.
Is that
correct? About the appropriateness of them being in positions of power re-EDI.
Yeah. So I'll just start with this, and you all can add in. But I really, when we talk about inclusiveness and when we talk about people really owning the work, everybody has to own the work, right? So just because I'm leading it doesn't mean I'm the only one that that can lead the work because I'm a person of color. I think that as long as we have that the objectives are clear, the purpose is clear, and we are all moving in the same direction, I think that white people can absolutely lead this work. I don't think that it has to be a Black person to do this. I think that we need inclusive teams to do this work.
I agree. I think I think you can be pink with purple spots and lead this work. I think you have to have the acumen, the heart, the team, the support from the organization or the company at the highest levels, and specifically to white people leading this work. We at the bank, we have something called our Black Executive Councils and our Hispanic Latino Councils, and they always wanted to come together and just meet with each other. And I think that is the most ridiculous thing I ever heard, because you can't put the marginalized group in the room and expect the marginalized group to solve their own problems. You have to bring other people into the narrative. And real talk, just being candid, if you look at the people that are in positions of power and influence that can really get things done, it's more than likely the majority. So to not include them and to say that, or to think that a white person couldn't lead this kind of work, it's sending us back 50 years. I would stand up and applaud if I saw a white person or someone else other than 3 Black women on the call driving this work. I think it's imperative that we start putting real diversity in work, which does not mean Black and Hispanic Latinos.
Kalandra, you said it perfectly, you and Kiva. I don't really have anything additional to add. I think it takes all of us. And my experiences have not been your experiences, nor has my experience been the same as a Hispanic person or someone who's from Vietnam that's,
right.
living in our community. So, you have to have the heart, you have to have the mindset and the will to do it. And I think it takes all of us coming together, bringing our different lenses and skill sets to really advance the work.
Absolutely.
And it's very emotional work too. I mean, like you said, if you got the will and skill, because it's not for the faint of heart, that's for sure.
That's right. That's right. Here's a really interesting question. And it's often said that our least diverse hour of the week is when we go to church on Sunday.
Sunday morning.
And so the question is, do you have any thoughts on how to incorporate this work in organizations like churches?
Yeah, I'll start, and I know I've been talking over Kiva and Effie the whole time, so
Yeah.
I'll quick. I think you're right. I think it was Dr. King that said Sunday morning is the most segregated time of the week. I think we have a partnership with Brian Stevens with the Equal Justice Initiative. He wrote he wrote the movie what is it? Just Mercy.
Just Mercy.
And he's president and CEO of the Equal Justice Initiative, and he challenged us to get proximate and local, so we can do all this great stuff at the top of the house at Bank of America, but at the end of the day, we have to get local and personal in our communities to really affect change. So what it looks like in Richmond may look different in Greensboro, will look different in Los Angeles, will look different in Atlanta. So I think another way to incorporate some of this is to take this outside of the context of just work, and what are we doing as individuals in our communities, in our schools, in our partnerships, whether we're on boards, getting inserted into corporate boards, taking some of all the skill building and this acumen that we do, and how do we pay it forward personally, specifically, and we haven't talked about this, in a work from home posture. So we've been going through all of this in isolation. So how do we really amp up our game and take this local and personal? I think that's the first step.
And I do think, Kalandra, just to add to what you said, and I think that is so powerful that we have to get outside of what's the norm for us, what's comfortable, and experience other cultures, try to walk in the shoes of someone else, like get to know someone else outside of our circle of influence, who oftentimes look like you, have similar thought processes as you. And so it just makes me think of, I do live in Guilford County, right outside of Greensboro, of just the work that some of the churches are doing with the Let's Talk series. I've participated in several of those, and just other community organizations where it allows you to actually learn and listen from other people who don't work in the same network and are part of the same network that you are. That's one of the ways that, going back to one of the earlier questions, how I have grown in this work, is that I had to take myself out of what was comfortable and really engage with people who didn't look like me, didn't think like me, didn't come from where I came from, because I grew up in a very rural town. So Kalandra, we are very similar in that, Eastern North Carolina. And my dad was a minister and my mom was the mother of the church. So every time the church door was open, I was there. And so very conservative views and values on things. And it was not until I moved away from home to a larger city that many of the biases and blind spots that I wasn't even aware of. And you're not made aware oftentimes until you get outside of that box. And so just encouraging people to get outside the box is just a powerful way to grow and to help in these change efforts that we do through this work.
Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's
Yeah,
right.
you know what? One thing, I was in a training session, and they said, and it was about cultural competence and humility, really, cultural humility, and which is really like deep self-awareness work. And they said, pull out your phones and look at your favorites outside of your family, like your family. Who's in that list? Do they look like you? Do they think like you? So start to think about who you're connecting with and how you can expand that. And I thought that's just a good, a good activity just to think about, because we get so caught up and we're busy and we're moving and we don't even think about how to expand our horizons and get to know other people. And so that's just one activity that kind of changed my mind around some things. So I thought that might be helpful.
So I've been on a number of these in the past few months of these sessions where we've generated very few questions. You all have done a great job of generating questions. And like I said, I'm just not gonna be able to get to them all. And so I'm hopeful that our group will be open to the possibility of maybe sharing some contact information down the line for folks who want to get back with you one-on-one, because I want to wrap things up with one final question here, and that is, if you had a crystal ball, what does this work look like 5 years from now? What does it include? What does it exclude down the line? What are we looking at in terms of EDI work?
So I'll kick it off, and I have to say, what I would love to see, and what I'm hoping that will happen, is that DEI is so embedded in everything we do, all aspects of our business, that people will still be needed to pay attention and to measure, but it's embedded and it becomes second nature, right? And when we have leaders that automatically think about who's excluded, or how can I reimagine my business to include more, to make sure that I'm inclusive of everybody, or how can I provide to my employees outside of a paycheck? What can I do for them? What do they need, and can we provide it? When we have other leaders outside of DEI and HR and in this space, like when you have business leaders and division leaders that are thinking that way, boy, that's going to be really impactful and will help us continue to keep this work sustainable, right? Because everything we do, we want it to be sustainable.
Right.
And so that's what I would love to see 5 years from now, is that it's fully embedded in our DNA.
Mm-hmm. Calandra, how about you?
Yeah, I think Kiva said it best. D&I everywhere. Again, I think it's no more programs. It's embedded into our processes, and it's phased out because processes touch everything. It's I think the second thing is that we see it showing up truly in society. So if you're financial services, we see it manifesting in closing the wealth gap, affordable housing. We see the gap closing there. We see, some of the economic disparities and the systemic issues that we know that have a racial divide. We see those closing. And then lastly, just in jest, I've worked myself out of a job because I'm no longer needed as the D&I executive. I can just come in and consult, and it's
That's
not a full job anymore. It's just so commonplace that you're like, who's that Calandra woman that used to work at the bank? That's the goal.
I think you're so good, they'll find something else for you to do. If you work yourself out of this job, that's for sure. How about you, Effie?
So I agree with what everyone has said. For me, I work in the world of education, but I understand that every system our children interact with has been built in institutional racism, and it has its impact, and it trickles over to schools. And so I know that with each system, we can't solve all of the problems, but some collectiveness across those systems, I think, would be what I would love to see in the future of equity work, and to see that no longer in our school systems will we be able to determine a child's outcome based on their race or their zip code. If we can solve that problem, we will be in a wonderful, wonderful place. And so we're going to keep striving to try to get there. It's a long road of work ahead, but that is where I would hope that we could get to.
That would be an incredible accomplishment, no doubt about that. Well, Effie and Calandra and Kiva, this has been a great conversation. I thank you all for participating and for being so generous with your time and everything that you've brought to this conversation. Thank you so much. And I'm sure that if we could see each other on the screen, everybody on the screen, we'd all be giving you a standing ovation. So we'll just do that virtually right now. So thank you for everything. And Rhonda, I'm going to turn it over to you to lead us out.
Thank you, Brent, and thank you for the excellent job you did in moderating this. There were so many nuggets and rich information that we received, and we will follow up with a survey that we're asking for you to please complete. We'll ask questions about things you may want to see in the future. Perhaps we'll do a part 2 of this dynamic panel because there's so many questions that weren't answered. And I was receiving texts during this and people were really blessed by it. So the last I checked, we're all created in the image of God. So we have to go out and continue to focus on making sure that everyone is valued and appreciated. And so thank you so much again for joining us this afternoon. Please make sure that you participate in the survey. We really looked for your feedback as we're looking to develop panels and workshops in the future. So thank you.
Thank you, Rhonda.
Thank you, Rhonda. Thank you to everybody involved. Have a wonderful day.
You too.
Bye.
Safe.